Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Ramot. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Via. And I'll spend the next 10 minutes telling you a little bit about our company and how we built it and what we are trying to do, and hopefully give you an idea for how one can build. I think this talk was titled A Different Transportation Unicorn. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but hopefully in the next 10 minutes we'll figure that out together. VIA is headquartered in New York, for those of you who don't know that much about us, which is where I'm based, and my co-founder, Oren Shoval, is based in Tel Aviv, where we do most of our technology development and product. We started about 7 years ago, and what we do fundamentally is we try to, and the theme here is digital, so I'll try to use that word, we try to digitize public mobility. And public mobility is transportation, often mass transportation in our view, that is supported, paid for at least in part by a public authority or a company or university by another group. And the original idea for VIA came about 7 years ago from a service that exists in Israel called Sherut taxis. For some of you in Israel, these are vans that run the bus routes. They're very low tech. They run fixed routes, and when you travel around the world in emerging markets, whether in South America, you see colectivos, or Central America, combis, marshrutkas in Russia, matatus in Africa. These van-based systems, other than in Europe and the US, are incredibly popular and are major ways by which people get around. So about 7 years ago, Oren, my co-founder, had the idea to take this van that runs a fixed route and digitize it, basically. Add a layer of technology to it, allow you to book a seat on your phone, and then with that knowledge, enable that van to change its route in real time and roam dynamically and create effectively a dynamic, on-demand bus. And that's how we've always thought about VIA. And when you think about what technology... So, you know, I mean, I'll say this anyway, even though I don't think it will be news to anyone. Digitizing transportation is a pretty big trend, in case you haven't been following it. Using technology, particularly the smartphone, to transform transportation is a big business. Perhaps not quite yet profitable in most cases, but nevertheless a big opportunity. Transportation is one of the largest sectors in the economy, second perhaps only to healthcare and real estate. And when you look at what the smartphone or digital technology has done to car rentals, we have companies like Turo and Getaround changing the way that we rent cars. You have companies like Uber and Lyft and others, Didi, Grab, changing the way we book a taxi. There's very little technology in public transportation of all kinds, whether it's the bus or the school bus or paratransit or any one of those modes. Those tend to be extremely low tech. And what we try to do is take that basic bus and again add a layer of technology to it and use data and the smartphone to make that a much smarter way to get around. We started out thinking that this was such a brilliant idea, having these microbuses that can drive around on demand and change their routes, that everybody else in the world would, of course, immediately recognize our brilliance and want to use our technology. So our original concept was that we would build this technology and we would take it to SNCF, the MTA in New York, TfL in London, and they would immediately grasp the magnitude of the potential and want to use our software basically every day. That didn't quite happen. So in 2012, we couldn't even get a single meeting with even the smallest public transit agency we tried to talk to. This was somewhat disappointing. And so we decided to go and launch our own service in New York. We started out by running a very basic van route that ran one route, not much different from that Sherut taxi in Israel. You could book a seat on your phone. I accosted a few hundred random people in the Upper East Side of Manhattan and convinced them to get into random black vans. So it turns out people do get into vans with strangers if you tell them that it's free, at least on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And that's how we got our original set of customers and started to build our technology. And thank God that we did that and didn't try to give, that TfL or SNCF or whoever did not choose to use our technology, because to be totally honest, it didn't work when we started. And what we learned was that building this technology is incredibly complex. Trying to match multiple passengers with a single vehicle in real time in a city like New York or London or Amsterdam or Berlin or anywhere else that we operate today is incredibly complicated and requires actually a lot of data. Not much different from building an autonomous vehicles where you're collecting millions and millions of miles and your software improves. Our software over the last 7 years has improved dramatically as we've collected more and more data. one example for why this is complicated that may not be immediately obvious. It turned out very quickly that if we have our little dynamic bus come to you and pick you up exactly where you are, we're never going to make the system work. In Manhattan, it's very easy to understand. You're standing on one side, in the middle of a block. And if we have to come to you, then we've got to circle the block. All the streets are one way, and that could take 5 minutes, sometimes even 10 minutes if you're around Times Square. In Paris, I think the best example would be if you're standing on one side of a very large boulevard and you want to go in the other direction. If you just cross the street, you can save that vehicle a lot of time instead of having to come around, pick you up, and then make another U-turn and come back around. Hopefully that makes sense. So we created this system that depended on a network of what we called virtual bus stops, where we would ask you to walk to a central location, often a street corner, so we could avoid having to make this detour. And what that meant was that all of a sudden we were routing vehicles not from your point of origin to your destination, which is a relatively simple problem. You can just interface with Google Maps or with Waze, ask them for the shortest path, and they'll direct you. All of a sudden, we had a cloud of possible pickup points that we could send you to, which were all these virtual bus stops around you. And we had a cloud of possible drop-off points. And we had a lot of people in the van, so there was an ordering question. Do you get on first or second? When do you get dropped off? And at any one point, once we started to have a bigger service, we could match you with any one of tens of vans. And so it turned out that every time you open the Via app and request a ride, we're computing tens of thousands of different routes on the back end and trying to find the fastest way to get you there and which is the best route and the best vehicle and so forth. And that computation is something that you can't just get from Google Maps. And in fact, you have to implement your own map and your own routing system in order to make it work in a few tens of milliseconds, which is the problem that we've had to solve. So that's just one simple example. I don't have a lot of time, so I'll keep it brief about what we discovered that made this technology very complex. Roll forward several years, we operate our service in New York, we expanded to Chicago, Washington, D.C. We realized we had competition that showed up a few years later in the form of Uber and Lyft and several of their shared services. And we came back to that original idea that our software could help public transit agencies and cities and universities run public mobility much more efficiently. And so we went back to those conversations, and this time we could actually get a meeting. We had data that showed that you could run mass transit dynamically in a smart way, that it could be convenient, that the cost per ride can be quite low when you do it right. And we started to get, in 2017, just a couple of years ago, our first set of municipal clients and transit clients. And today, we have a Via system powering public transportation in about 80 different cities across 20 different countries. We just recently awarded a contract from the city of New York to power the local school bus system, the yellow bus school bus system. So that's 150,000 students that have to get to school every day in nearly 10,000 buses. And we're going to determine their routes and manage that whole system and give parents an app so that they can track their child and understand where they're going and know where the bus is coming from. And we've also been getting into what's known as paratransit, which is transportation for folks who have some level of disability and need support. These are services that operate extremely inefficiently today all over the world and are funded by the taxpayers. So we believe there's a really big opportunity in public mobility and in digitizing it. We believe that it's a much bigger opportunity, if you will, than the car rental space that companies like Get Around Tour are going after, or even in the ride-hailing space and the taxi space that some of the best-known companies in certainly transportation tech are going after. And we see a real need to do it. It doesn't require disruption. It actually requires collaboration. In some sense, it's very European. And we find that partnering with cities and approaching cities in a positive way and speaking to them about what they're looking to do and how they're looking to reduce congestion and take vehicles off the street and provide an accessible solution that's open to everyone and one that's affordable is something that they respond to very well today. And that is a problem that technology can really help solve and bring about some good in this world. And that's what we're really focused on at VIA. So thanks very much for listening, and bye.